Hello everyone, I'm Marty Pospischil. Thank you for joining another Fireside Chat. And back with us again is my friend and professional in conveyancing, Carolynne Maguire with Maguire Company. Welcome.
Thank you.
Yes. And today we're going to talk about, we're going to touch on being a first-time home buyer and what does that look like to you as a first-time home buyer. I know when we're introduced, whether it's me or Adam or Nick or anyone on our team that you're meeting with to buy your first home, we go through a plethora of information and programs, etc. So we're covering a lot of the details. In that case, we take you out, we find out what your parameters are, show you properties, you purchase a property, get an accepted offer, typically with subjects. And once those subjects are removed, you have a subject-free contract of purchase and sale, and that's the point at which we introduce you to a conveyancing specialist, such as Carolynne Maguire, a Notary Public, who's been in business for many, many, many years. Both of us have. We won't get into that.
How many decades?
Decades, many decades. We've both been around, and that's where you kind of take over the correspondence and information flow with the client. As a first-time buyer, what can they sort of expect your role to be at that point, Carolynne?
Fair enough. We basically continue from your handoff, and our role is that we're going to use the contract that has now been established as our set of instructions. And we are going to be acting for only one of the two parties, so the buyer in this case. And so we're going to be looking to protect the buyer's interests in accordance with their agreement. And much like you, we believe in communication and transparency being kind of not only ongoing, but information somewhat front-loaded to give, especially first-time home buyers, you know, the opportunity to work with us, you know, follow along, know what's going on, to avoid surprises, you know, anywhere, but especially toward the end of the process. So depending on how much time there is now from subject removal to completion, we are happy to communicate and be introduced and answer questions, but in fairness, so that our due diligence process is fresh at the time of closing, we won't actually initiate the file fully until about, you know, 3-ish weeks ahead of the completion date.
Got it.
So it's ideal if we have received the information ahead of that so that we hit the ground running. And ways that we can receive that information is, for example, the real estate office. Like your office would send the, you know, transaction package to us in advance. And on our website, which you see here, marpolnotary.com, our particular circumstances are that we've developed a property file starter. It's like an intake form questionnaire that can be done online and prompts for the information that we will need to gather in any event and pairs it with the contract. And that can be done anytime after subject removal. Not all firms will have that same process, so I can only speak for my own, and every firm, lawyer or notary practicing in conveyance, you know, is going to have a process that they follow. So I can only speak to my own. But in any event,
I love your file starter process, by the way. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but it really saves time in the process when you're coming into the office for the signing. All of that information needs to be taken up front, and having an online process where the client can go to and fill that in ahead of time is fantastic. So good on you for doing that.
Thank you, Marty. You know, we put a lot of time into it, and we've tried to make it as user-friendly as possible, and it does gather a lot of information, but most people will have the answers because it's about them and their transaction. But where it also really does benefit the buyer is that they can do it any time of day and anywhere in the world. So that makes it very easy for people to work with us. But this is not to say that we require it, because there are going to be people who are not comfortable with online forms. And, you know, I'm happy to have a personal discussion, you know, as well, you know, to gather that information. So, you know, we just adapt to the client's needs. But in any event, once we actually initiate the file, we're going to be even more communicative with our clients. You know, our particular process is that we share the documents with our clients in advance so that they're previewing them before we meet. We only have to meet one time And that's usually just a few days before closing. But at that point, it should be somewhat anticlimactic.
Right.
All the information is with our client, and any urgent questions or what have you have been answered. But when we get to our meeting, we're going to look through it all over again, explain it in more detail, and take you through that process of signing the documents. It's at that point we would normally receive the bank draft for the balance to close the transaction, which information would have been provided earlier. And then that's the one meeting. Everything else is again, sent, electronically. All the land title processes are electronic, so all of the documents we can send you electronic. There are no originals other than the electronic record, in the land title office. So we will report after closing, excuse me, and it's really back to Marty or your realtor, as the case may be, where they're going to handle the keys and the physical aspects of possession and things like that.
All the fun stuff.
All the fun stuff. We miss out on the fun stuff. We're
I think you have fun.
We're a hub, really. That's what it comes down to, and it is fun. I mean, I've been doing this long enough where if it weren't fun, I would still be doing it.
Got a great team. Yeah.
Great team. Yeah, I love our people, and what happens is that ultimately the home buyer has been guided from the realtor and mortgage professional through us. As I say, we're a hub where we're now dealing with those professionals and the firm on the other side, and insurance companies and strata companies, and we're doing all of that in the background.
Right. Right.
And then we present the results, and then the final sort of job done confirmation is eventually you'll receive a state of title certificate showing you as the owner, with anything that the seller had to get rid of gone, and your mortgage, if applicable, on that title.
And there's a lot of background work that you guys are doing. Your whole team is anything from strata documents, as you say, mortgage documents. It's incredible how they assemble all that information to the point where you, as a first-time buyer coming in a relatively short period of time, signing everything, and it's all done.
We do try to make it easy.
It looks easy from the outside, right?
Well, that's what they say about professionals. If it sort of seems effortless, it's because they know what they're doing. But like a duck, as they say on calm water, it's all the paddling's going on underneath.
Yes, and can ducks smile? They don't really know. Anyways. We digress again. Okay, good question that first-time homebuyers may ask as they go, when I go in and meet with Carolynne, what can I do to prepare for that besides the file starter kit? What should I do? What should I bring? Maybe you want to say a couple words on that.
Sure. Well, the file starter part was well before we opened the file, so that was in the past. And at this stage, when they're meeting with us, we will have sent them their document set in full for preview. So what we would certainly encourage everyone to do is to read it, look through it. Ask your questions, call me, email back to us beforehand.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that is the opportunity to learn what we're doing for you, and we give you lists and options and things that might trigger an action on your part that might not apply to someone else. So we're trying to cover a lot of bases, and we are trying to tailor our service to each client, so that the idea is that person has been well served when they come to meet with me. As I say, hopefully there aren't any surprises, but if there are, we handle them.
Right.
And so, it's not a problem, and we usually would engage other professionals if a solution required it. So, we're all on the same team. We're advocating for your success, and that's why I think we get along so well.
Absolutely.
Communication is important.
Communication, key.
Exactly.
Key.
But in terms of what to bring, you absolutely can expect us to remind you to bring your government-issued photo ID. That's, obviously for FinTrack and for countermeasures against fraud, and of course lender requirements and all these things. So you're going to have to present, some really good a government-issued photo ID, proof of your social insurance number, because that's a requirement from the property transfer tax people. You will be given the option to bring your bank draft to that appointment, though it's not required. You can drop it off not later than the morning of the completion date. And there might be some other sundry items like a void check or this or that, if that's sort of lender requirement or something. So we'll let you know what to bring. But really, just if you've looked through the material and you've been in contact with us, we shouldn't be presenting you with any surprises, but we will be giving you a more in-depth discussion of your documents when you arrive.
Fair enough. That's great. And again, the key here is you guys are excellent in giving that information out and communicating with the client. If you as a first-time home buyer have any questions, the time to ask those questions is well before the completion day. If there's questions on your mortgage amount, if it doesn't look right, or any of the adjustments that are taking place in the sale, which you will have ahead of time from your Notary Public, that's the time to ask them. And that's really good advice.
Well, let's just say there's no bad time to ask them.
Right.
Just ask questions. That's how we can help you. Absolutely.
And another piece of advice, don't show up with your mom on completion day and tell Carolynne, oh, by the way, I'm adding mom to title.
That doesn't really happen.
I hope not.
Except that one time. No.
That one.
No.
No big surprises.
And the reason that couldn't happen is because there would have to be changes to the contract.
Of course
and such,
there would.
But surprises to us would be something we'd want to avoid too. So that's why the communication goes both ways.
Absolutely,
for sure.
Absolutely. Now I mentioned the statement of adjustments, and that's a really important piece of information that you prepare that lays out all of the numbers, and it's probably for me as a buyer one of the most important things. Everything's important, and I read through that entire package when I get it from you.
Of course you do.
From top to bottom, every word, excellent reading, especially the mortgage documents.
And you're not a first-time home buyer.
I'm not.
It doesn't matter how many times you've done it. You should look through the paperwork.
Read it each time.
Exactly.
But the statement of adjustments is very important because that's the monies. How much deposit? How much? And sorry, I'm jumping a little bit ahead, but maybe explain to our first-time buyers what that statement is generally, and I know it varies client to client. But what can a first-time buyer expect to see in the statement of adjustments?
Fair enough. Well, I will say you've hit on what is probably the most complicated document for most people who've not seen one before to process. And it won't appear necessarily the same in every firm because it has to do with what software they're using or the terms of the transaction. But the gist of it is that we're trying to account for every penny.
Right.
Okay, so we're trying to demonstrate using debits and credits, what money, is being brought to the transaction, and what money, and how it's being spent, basically. And some of those things are actually adjustments, thus the name, between buyers. So there's no actual money going back and forth. It's kind of just evening itself out.
Right.
The idea being, for example, property taxes. So they're going to be paid by one party or the other, depending on the time of year, because they're usually due in the middle of the year. So there's going to be an adjustment to prorate what amount has been paid, where there will be a debit to one party and a credit to the other to settle it out, to make it fair, so that at the end, those taxes have been properly weighted between the two parties, depending on the time of year of the transaction. That's true for the strata fees. If it happens somewhere in the middle of the month, it happens for sometimes municipal utilities or this or that. Things that run with the property are going to be adjusted.
Right.
But things that you open your own account for, like your BC Hydro account or your internet or these kinds of things, they are not adjusted. They are things that you open your own account, and when you sell, you close your account. So that's the difference for adjustments. And then we're also, as I say, processing the fact that we're, unless you qualify for an exemption, property transfer tax is paid at the time of closing, your deposit is accounted for, the mortgage proceeds are coming in. All of this will result in one bottom line amount. That is the amount that we require to complete the transaction after everything has been done. that we require a bank draft for, typically, or wired funds. It has to be guaranteed by a bank.
Right. And that's why I go through that statement of adjustments line by line when you send that to me or our clients to review. It's a very important piece of paper. It's the accounting of the entire transaction. Yeah?
Yeah. And sometimes it's so good to hear from a client who says, but what about this? Because it happens where maybe there's been a subsequent amendment to the contract.
Right.
That wasn't, forwarded to us by the time we're preparing those documents.
Right.
And, all of a sudden now there's a $5,000 something or other, that needs to be there.
Yeah.
And we wouldn't know about it until it's brought to our attention. You don't know what you don't know.
Of course.
So that's what I mean about being a team effort.
Absolutely. And that's a very good example. Sometimes there is some last minute adjustments in price that might account for certain things that the buyer and seller agree to. And it's very important for us as your realtor to get that off to the conveyancers so they're aware of that. But a lot of the time, on a very tight completion, that needs to be done quickly because on average we get a month, 2 months, 3 months completions very dramatically. But if it's short, we've had very short completions following subject removal, and everyone's scrambling to get that information out, but it's very important. And another area I know of confusion for our clients is with respect to adjustments for property tax, specifically when they're completing around like early July or late June.
Very special time
of
year. It's
a very special. I thought the seller was going to pay the property taxes. I was told this, and we were told that. So that's something really important to be clear on.
It takes a lot of experience to fathom that part
around that time of year. Absolutely. And in Vancouver, we have 2 dates in February and in July, but that's something that you pay very close attention to.
Yes, I mean, obviously we have the experience and most conveyancing firms obviously know their way around all of this. So it's really just a question of having it properly communicated to our client.
Absolutely, absolutely. So let's talk, you touched on the property transfer tax, and that's a really important thing for first-time buyers to know because it's a lot of money. There is an exemption available for qualified first-time buyers to save in the property transfer tax. Let's talk a little bit about that exemption if we could.
Sure, of course. Unfortunately, we don't see it used as often now.
Why is that, Carolynne?
Because the cap, the limit, hasn't changed in years.
Yes.
It's
true.
Still, you only get a full exemption up to, I think, $500,000 valued properties.
Correct.
And then it wanes between 5 and 525 to 0.
Yes.
So if you're not buying under 525, there is no exemption for you.
Tough to do in Vancouver.
Tough to do.
It can happen, but it's
in the valley. There are still some condominiums and this and that, and so yes, we do still see it, but not as often as the prices climb and have done so for so many years.
Right.
But in any event, let's say that the price is $479 or something. I don't know what, but you found this great spot. The other criteria, of course, have to do with the buyer themselves. So the key, because first time seems to vary from program to program with different governments and such. Right. But for the PTT people, you must never have been registered on title to a property in which you lived anywhere in the world.
Anywhere in the world.
Just, they mean it. When they say first time, it's not open to discussion. First means first.
Segue, when we start colonizing the moon and Mars, and you own property on different planets, that doesn't apply here, because it does say anywhere in the world, doesn't it?
True. I think we're going to have to bring Elon in on this.
We might have to.
Yeah. Find out how that's going to be run. But
sorry, I like to just throw something in there because there may be some changes coming up.
There may be some changes.
But anywhere in the world, most people.
Planet, being the focus, yes, it's first time only.
Right.
And so a lot of people say, well, but I haven't owned in 20 years. Doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Ever.
So
anywhere in the world.
Anywhere. Okay, so let's say you meet that threshold.
Right.
But you also have to have lived in BC as a BC resident for at least a year prior to your closing, and or have filed, I think it's any 2 of the past 6 years, you have to have filed an income tax return as a BC resident. So, this kind of catches up where sometimes students are, in and out of provinces and whatever, but they're generally resident in BC. So there are some ways around these things. But what I would encourage anyone who's planning on that exemption to do is to just check the criteria. They're online, and they can, make sure.
Yeah.
But otherwise budget for the PTT, because unless you have an exemption, it is payable.
Yes, and it's really interesting if you do download that first-time buyers program exemption for the property transfer tax. I was just scanning through it. There's also jumping between 500 and 525 if the property is greater than 0.5 hectares, which is not the case in Vancouver. I don't know of any properties that large, but it's quite interesting. So there's some really interesting reading there. We'll put a link in the description below for that program. It's interesting reading. And of course, not everyone is exempt if you're a first-time home buyer. There's all those steps that we touched on.
That's right. And yes, there are a number of lesser-known criteria. So I'm glad you mentioned it, because different areas in the province have different criteria. We're using numbers and details that are specific to our Lower Mainland area. There are, in many government programs, different numbers, different criteria.
Yes.
But they all come back to looking at the program's criteria specifically before you count on that exemption.
Absolutely.
So, and it does change.
It
hasn't
does
been
change.
a long time, but it can change.
It's too bad they're not changing.
We check it.
I know. They need to change that threshold, because for Vancouver, Toronto, 2 big market areas where the pricing has changed dramatically over the years, 500,000 just doesn't apply. It's
a difficult task.
Right. So that would be a good change if anyone from the government's listening.
Well, if we're going to be throwing our ideas into the ring here for politicians to consider.
Yes.
I've always wondered why they couldn't just give an exemption to whatever number they want to anybody, even if you're buying $1 million property, give them some kind of exemption up to whatever their limit is.
Right.
And let the difference be paid.
Right. What's wrong with that?
What's wrong with
absolutely.
that,
Get an exemption up to 500, for example, and then nothing after that. Yeah.
There are lots of ways it could be looked at, but so far, since Vanderzam, it hasn't changed very much.
Yes. Yeah. Wow. Those are
we
the
are
days.
dating ourselves.
Yeah. Oh my God. Most people won't know who that is. Another thing that we're asked a lot from first-time buyers, which we chat about in the buyers meetings, is how much of a down payment do they need? And just to clarify that, again, if your purchase is under $500,000, you can put a 5% deposit down. If it's over $1 million, you must have at least 20% is the rule of thumb and the rule in BC. And then it is a linear progression as you go from 500 to $1 million. So again, if you're under 500, 5% will do, but typically that's hard to find. So you should probably budget for close to, if not at 20% for the down payment.
Well, I think that ultimately comes back to that exhaustive discussion that you, Adam, Nick, your team will have with a first-time home buyer.
Yeah.
It's not something we're typically privy to.
Of course, yeah.
So that is really good preparation, because the budgeting is key, and we certainly, if questions are going to come up at our end, it's typically around title or money.
Yes, absolutely.
And those are questions, as much as possible, best addressed as early as possible.
Yes.
And you do that, and I appreciate that. And certainly that does distinguish the true professionals from the shall we say more casual professionals who perhaps don't invest as much.
You're so kind. I like the way.
I just feel like everybody's going to find a good fit for them as a professional, but ultimately it comes down to service.
Absolutely.
And service these days has taken on a very different sort of
absolutely
meaning.
Absolutely. and you're right. I mean, you want to find a professional that meets what you're looking for. I'm very detailed oriented, which is why I love the way your team works, and yourself, crossing all your T's, dotting your I's, and just making sure everything is done ahead of time. So there's no mass scramble at the end. Sometimes there's situations that arise that are unavoidable, but it's all about communication, being prepared, specifically all the time, but when you're a first-time buyer, because a lot of this is new to you.
There's more learning. There
more
needs
learning.
To be more time allowed for the learning.
Absolutely,
that's right.
Absolutely, and that's very important. And I should also add, we've just touched on a few areas here for first-time buyers. There's new programs that are available that the government has introduced, and some of them are so new that we're trying to figure out, how do they work? How do you qualify for that program and this program? There's many of them which we go through in the buyers meetings and that are available. And if you have any questions with respect to any of those programs, we'll certainly be covering that when you come in and discuss with us about this very important first-time purchase. And also we'll provide a few links in the description below as well to send you to some of these programs to help answer your questions. But that was good discussion. First-time buyers are great to work with. They're so excited.
They are. I love the enthusiasm. It's, you know what, that's one of the things that keeps me coming back to work every day, is that we get a little bit to live vicariously through our clients.
Yes.
So we are so grateful and fortunate for first-time home buyers. It can sometimes be, seniors making, a new chapter in their life.
Yeah.
It can be, now we've expanded the family, we need more room.
Yes.
These are all positives, for the most part. We're sharing in that, and great stories, and we look forward to that. That that sort of energy feeds us too. So we love the communication. Don't be shy to ask those questions, and keep us informed of what's going on.
Absolutely.
That's important.
You've touched on something that I really enjoy about our business, and that is the people part of it. We get to see these people, especially when we've been around as long as we have, when they're buying their first home, and then when they're meeting up with their life partner and they're buying something larger, and then they have children, and then I've seen people right from that stage right up to the retirement point where they're selling the retirement.
That's it, right? We're on like second, third, fourth generation people who are buying, because they were in our office as toddlers.
Yes.
And now they're young adults and parents and all of this. Of course, we don't see every stage of development, but it's
great.
Wonderful to see the same families coming back time again.
You get a little snapshot in their life.
It starts with first-time home buyers.
It does.
And that's why we invest so much time in that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's great. I feel like I've been around for 100 years after that discussion.
But it's a great century.
It's been an awesome century.
And on to the next one.
First-time buyers, I hope you enjoyed that brief discussion today. Thank you, Carolynne, for joining us.
My pleasure, Marty. Thanks.
Any other questions, feel free to email us. We're here to help you guys. Thanks again.